Some people think cleanliness begins with soap and water, but that idea collapses quickly once you enter the Sahara. Secrets of survival hide inside gestures so small they almost vanish, yet they kept generations alive in a land built from heat, dust, and silence. What looks primitive becomes precise, and what seems simple reveals an intelligence shaped by thousands of years. Tonight you will walk beside these women and see how hygiene becomes an art carved by the desert itself. So before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel only if your heart truly wants to. If you do like it, leave a little comment letting me know what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights. Adjust the pillow to fit your head. Maybe turn on a fan to create a relaxing atmosphere. And let's begin this journey together tonight. If one were to place a hand against the air of the Sahara before sunrise, they would notice how the wind feels older than the land itself, carrying a dryness that clings to the skin as if trying to extract something from it. The desert reveals its character not through dramatic storms or roaring heat at first, but through a slow and constant pull that weakens the body in quiet ways. For the women who live there, this is not a poetic observation. It is the background of every moment shaping how they move, how they breathe, and how they keep themselves clean enough to endure another day. The Sahara is not simply dry. It is a place where dryness becomes a presence filling the space between breaths. Every grain of sand, no matter how small, seems to carry its own intent. It settles on the eyelashes inside the folds of clothing, beneath layers of fabric meant to shield the skin. Women learn early that sand is not an enemy. They cannot fight it, but a force that must be managed with patience. It exfoliates, irritates, inflames and scratches. Left unattended, it opens the skin in tiny splits that widen with each gust of heated wind. The sun follows quickly. It rises with a certainty that the women never question because there is nothing gentle about it. The sunlight drags moisture from the body without hesitation, leaving lips cracked and skin stiff, as though the desert is reshaping the human form to match its own dryness. Exposed skin lasts only minutes before beginning to burn. The heat is not a wave that comes and goes. It is a weight that settles on the body, pressing down until movement feels like resistance against something invisible. No one who has not lived in the Sahara understands the logic behind covering every part of the body in layers of thick cloth. Outsiders imagine heat requires exposure, airflow, and freedom for the skin. But airflow does not exist in the Sahara. There is only wind, and wind here is not a relief. It is abrasive, hot, and filled with particles that cut like fine blades. Women wrap themselves in fabric not to hide, not to follow custom, but to survive. Every uncovered surface is a point of vulnerability. Cleanliness in the way the modern world imagines it has no place in this environment. Water is not a cleansing tool. It is a resource prioritized for the throat, not the skin. A body washed too often risks losing essential oils that protect it from the burning wind. A face scrubbed too thoroughly becomes more fragile. A hand rinsed repeatedly becomes more likely to crack. In a place where the environment punishes softness, the women learn to preserve whatever resilience the body can produce on its own. They must choose carefully what to clean, when to clean, and how. Dust is tolerated, sometimes even welcomed, because it forms a thin coating that shields the skin from harsher elements. Sweat is allowed to dry naturally, because wiping it away only irritates the surface. It is almost ironic, like watching someone polish a fragile vase in a world where the shelves themselves are collapsing. Survival here is not about shining or smelling pleasant. It is about maintaining the body's structure against forces that never rest. I often think about how strange it must seem to people, far from the Sahara, the idea that dust can protect that cloth, can cool that covering the body, can prevent harm more effectively than exposing it. It reminds me that assumptions built in comfortable environments collapse instantly when placed in harsher ones. The desert rewrites rules without apology. The women do not discuss these things. They do not complain about the wind or question the sun. Their movements carry the quiet acceptance of those who have lived under the same conditions as their mothers and grandmothers. They understand that the first step in caring for the body is acknowledging what the land demands. A cracked lip tells them the wind was too strong. A burning cheek tells them a cloth was not wrapped tightly enough. A grain of sand trapped beneath a layer of fabric leaves a mark that warns them to adjust their coverings. Their hygiene begins with the recognition that the desert does not negotiate. It takes before it gives. The sand strips the skin, the heat draws out oils, and the dry air weakens hair and eyes. Women respond in ways that may seem unusual to outsiders. ways that are labeled strange, primitive, or unclean by those who have never stood in this environment. But each method, each habit, is the result of countless encounters with the same unforgiving elements. To live here is to be shaped constantly. Bodies adapt, routines evolve, and definitions of cleanliness shift into something more realistic, something grounded in survival rather than appearance. Every action is intentional, wrapping the face, closing the eyes against the wind, pressing cloth tightly around the neck, adjusting garments before stepping outside. These are not rituals, but requirements. And so the harshness of the Sahara is not simply the first reason behind their hygiene practices. It is the foundation. Every other gesture, habit, and technique they develop comes from this unchanging truth. The land decides how the body must be protected. The desert begins the conversation, and the women finish it by learning its language. The landscape dictates their earliest choices, shaping the way they guard their bodies against the burning wind and relentless dryness. From that starting point, another layer of their daily struggles slowly emerges, shaped not by preference, but by the need to endure. And within that layer lies a method so simple, yet so unexpected, that it reveals how deeply survival defines their idea of cleanliness. Cleanliness in the Sahara is not a matter of comfort or appearance. It is a negotiation with forces that do not care whether the body endures or collapses. Women living in this landscape understand that hygiene is not the soft ritual it becomes in places with running water and mild weather. Here, it is a strategy for survival shaped by the simple truth that the desert tends to break whatever is not protected carefully. Every morning begins not with the thought of feeling refreshed, but with the quiet calculation of how to keep the body functioning for another day. Moisture is the first thing to guard. The air strips it away before sweat has a chance to form, leaving the skin brittle and thirsty. Women learn to trap whatever moisture they have using oils when they can find them, or pressing cloth close to their faces to reduce the loss. Their goal is not to soften the skin but to stop it from splitting open. A cracked surface is not a cosmetic inconvenience. It is an invitation for infection in a place where wounds do not heal easily. The desert is not dramatic about its harm. It weakens slowly, steadily, with a dryness that never retreats. Protecting the skin from sunlight is the next priority. The sun in the Sahara does not simply shine. It presses down with a weight that seems to melt the air around it. For women, this daily exposure requires constant vigilance. They cover themselves tightly, not to hide from judgment, but from ultraviolet rays that would scorch their bodies raw. Heat blisters, sunburns, and peeling skin are not occasional accidents. They are predictable outcomes for anyone careless enough to expose their body too long. The desert punishes every oversight. Infection is an ever-present threat. Dust carries bacteria, and small injuries escalate quickly when mixed with sweat, heat, and grime. Women understand that the body must be kept in a condition that resists these dangers. A clean wound must be protected immediately. A patch of irritated skin must be shielded. A sore spot must be covered. Hygiene becomes a form of self-defense, and every gesture is deliberate. It is almost amusing how, in a place obsessed with survival, the idea of smelling pleasant becomes the most useless luxury imaginable. There is no room for indulgence. No scented baths, no gentle soaps, no soothing lotions. Even water, the most essential element of cleanliness, cannot be used with abandon. It must be saved for drinking, conserved for cooking, rationed for survival. Washing the whole body frequently is dangerous, because it removes the natural oils that protect the skin from wind and abrasion. Women must adopt a different understanding of what it means to be clean. Sometimes, keeping dirt in place is safer than removing it. In other climates, cleanliness is measured by sight. Here it is measured by health. I often think about how quickly these practices would be dismissed by people far from the desert. It resembles the difference between someone polishing the outside of a house while the foundation quietly crumbles beneath them. Survival exposes vanity for what it is, a luxury reserved for those who don't have to fight their environment. Women in the Sahara do not waste energy on illusions. Every movement is practical, every habit shaped by necessity. I find myself strangely admiring that clarity, even when it carries a certain sadness. Moisturizing is not aesthetic, it is a shield. Oil creates a barrier against the desert's grip, keeping the skin flexible enough to withstand wind and heat. Women apply it sparingly, understanding that too much will attract dust, but too little will leave them vulnerable. This precision is not taught in formal lessons. It is learned through experience, passed down silently from one generation to the next. Children watch their mothers and imitate them, learning the balance required to stay healthy in a place where the body is always at risk. Protecting the lips and eyes requires special attention. The wind dries them faster than any other part of the body, and even a few hours without covering can lead to painful swelling. Women wrap cloth tightly across their faces, allowing only narrow openings for sight. They blink often, letting the tears form naturally, creating a thin protective layer against dust. It is a strange kind of hygiene, less about removing impurities and more about preventing exposure. The desert demands prevention, not repair. Hands and feet require constant care as well. They crack easily, and once damaged, the pain interferes with walking, carrying, cooking, and every essential task. Women rub oil into their knuckles, press cloth between their toes, and avoid stepping on hot sand without protection. Their rituals are small, repetitive, and often invisible to outsiders, but each one is vital. Without this attention, life becomes unbearable quickly. Hygiene also means avoiding fatigue. A tired body loses its ability to self-regulate, making it more susceptible to heat stroke and dehydration. Women move slowly, conserve energy, and avoid unnecessary exertion. Cleaning routines are adjusted not for comfort but for endurance. If washing wastes too much strength or exposes too much skin to the wind, it is postponed. Cleanliness is not idealism. It is realism shaped by harsh lessons. The desert pushes the body to its limits, and women respond with practices that blur the line between hygiene and survival. They understand that a healthy body is their only defense against the forces around them. Cleanliness in this landscape is not a choice but a weapon. Every action, no matter how mundane, carries the weight of necessity. Their routines form a fragile barrier between the body and a landscape that erodes everything it touches. From those careful gestures, another truth begins to take shape, one that reveals how they turn scarcity itself into a tool. Somewhere within that truth appears a method so quietly effective that it changes the way survival is understood. Cleaning the body in the Sahara often begins with materials that to outsiders might look like the very things one should avoid touching. Ash and red clay are not emergency substitutes or temporary solutions. They are the foundation of hygiene for women who must adapt to a land that refuses to offer anything gentler. When water is scarce and wind strips the skin relentlessly, these substances become tools not by choice but by necessity. They are taken from the earth and fire, shaped by the hands that know how to turn the harshest elements into protection. Ash is collected from the remains of campfires, sifted with slow movements until only the finest powder remains. Women use it as a form of exfoliation, rubbing it onto the skin to remove layers of dust, sweat, and dead cells that accumulate under the desert's constant assault. The texture is gentle enough not to tear the skin, yet coarse enough to clean it thoroughly. Rinsing with water is not always an option, so the ash is brushed away with practiced strokes. What remains is a surface less irritated, less likely to crack, and more capable of handling wind and heat. It seems contradictory, using something produced by burning wood to soothe the skin, yet this contradiction has been a quiet truth in the desert for generations. Red clay serves a different purpose. It is dug from patches of earth, where the soil gathers minerals that help draw oil and heat away from the body. Women mix small amounts with the moisture available, sometimes a drop of water, sometimes a bit of natural oil, and spread it onto their faces or bodies as a cooling mask. As it dries, the clay absorbs excess oil, settles into the pores, and creates a temporary barrier against the sun. The sensation is cooling, grounding, almost like borrowing a fragment of the earth to shield the flesh. The clay leaves a faint color on the skin, a reddish tint that outsiders might find unusual, but here it signals care rather than neglect. None of these practices is decorative. They are made for endurance. It is almost darkly amusing how some people in distant cities pay high prices for products claiming to be earth-based, while these women use the earth itself without ceremony. There is no advertisement, no packaging, no promise of beautification. The goal is simple: keep the skin strong enough to survive tomorrow. In the Sahara, function triumphs over presentation every time. Ash also offers another benefit. It restores balance to the skin. Its mild alkalinity helps clean without stripping away natural oils completely. Women know from experience that a body over-cleaned becomes vulnerable. They trust the ash because it never pretends to do more than it can. It removes what harms and leaves what protects. To me, this practicality feels strangely comforting, as if the desert forces clarity where other places encourage excess. Red clay follows the same philosophy. It is applied sparingly, with an understanding of how much the skin needs, rather than how much one desires. The clay cools overheated skin, helps calm irritation, and prevents the formation of rashes caused by friction. Once removed, the skin underneath feels steadier, less reactive. It is not polished or glowing. It is simply stable, and in the Sahara, stability is all that can be asked for. For women here, ash and clay are not strange choices. They are as normal as soap and water elsewhere. Children grow up watching their mothers knead clay between their fingers or shake ash through their palms, learning the exact texture that signals quality. They memorize the look of good clay, the smell of fresh ash, the way each substance responds to touch. Cleanliness becomes not a luxury, but a craft shaped by the environment itself. The absence of water might seem like a limitation, but these women treat it like a framework. They know how to substitute, how to blend, and how to maintain hygiene without relying on resources they cannot spare. Their knowledge is not romantic or mystical. It is practical, born of repetition and survival. If one were to compare this to modern habits, it would resemble repairing a roof with the materials available, rather than waiting for the perfect tools to arrive. Life demands action before ideal conditions are met. Some routines involve mixing ash with oil to create a paste that removes deep grime from the skin without causing damage. Others involve layering clay on areas that have been exposed too long to the sun. Each method has been shaped by countless adjustments over time. The women do not record these techniques in books or explain them aloud. They are passed through gestures, through observation, through the quiet understanding that knowledge must be preserved in the body rather than on the page. To an outsider, these substances may appear messy, crude, or insufficient. But the desert does not care for appearance, and neither do the women who live under its rules. Ash and clay provide what the environment refuses to give: protection, balance, and a chance at comfort in a place that rarely offers any. Their simplicity hides their value. Their earthiness hides their effectiveness. In the Sahara, the ground and fire become allies, reshaping the meaning of what it means to stay clean. Their reliance on ash and clay reveals how survival turns ordinary materials into essential tools for the body. From these quiet routines, another layer of adaptation begins to surface, one that deepens the connection between skin and sand. Somewhere in that connection emerges a practice so unexpected that it reshapes the idea of cleansing entirely. The sight of a woman in the Sahara with her face lightly coated in dust might confuse anyone unfamiliar with the desert. To an outsider, it can appear careless, unclean, or even accidental, as if she has just walked through a storm and has not yet brushed herself off. But in the Sahara, nothing about dust on the skin is accidental. Women here understand that what other people label as dirt can become a shield, a quiet layer of protection built from the same land that threatens them. The desert is not generous, but it provides materials that, when understood correctly, become life-saving. Dust settles on the body, constantly carried by winds that never fully rest. Instead of fighting it, women embrace its presence. A thin layer of dust reduces direct contact with the sun, dispersing heat before it reaches the skin. It forms a muted barrier that slows down the burning effects of ultraviolet light. The desert sun bites hard, and anything that dulls its teeth is welcomed. Dust becomes a companion, covering exposed areas with a softness that feels strange when compared to the brutality of the environment. Ash joins this protective mixture. Left behind after fires burn low, it is collected for its ability to adhere gently to the skin. Ash diffuses, glare reduces, shine, and prevents sweat from evaporating too quickly. Sweat is precious not for comfort but for function. If it disappears too fast, the skin dries, cracks, and becomes vulnerable. A thin veil of ash traps moisture just long enough for the body to use it effectively. There is something almost darkly ironic about using the remnants of fire to guard the body against the fire-like heat above. Red earth, too, finds its place. When spread across the face, it cools the skin, draws out excess oil, and reinforces the protective barrier that dust and ash begin. The color may alarm those who expect cleanliness to look pale and polished, but in the Sahara, the deep red tint is a sign of resilience. Women do not look for brightness or shine, they look for endurance. A face that appears dirty by the standards of distant cities is in truth better defended against burns, dehydration, and infection. I often think about how differently people behave in places where the climate does not pressure every decision. It resembles the difference between polishing the exterior of a fragile object while ignoring the cracks forming underneath. In the Sahara, appearance has no value unless it helps the body survive. Vanity is not condemned, It simply cannot compete with the needs of the environment. I find myself quietly respecting the clarity this creates, though it comes at the cost of comfort. Dust, ash, and clay are not used randomly. Women apply them with intention, spreading them across the cheeks, forehead, and nose in patterns their mothers taught them. These materials absorb sweat, block direct sunlight, and slow the rate at which the skin loses moisture. In the hottest hours, when wind carries heat like a second sun, the coated skin withstands the pressure better than untreated flesh. The sensation is odd, cool in some moments, dry in others, but always protective. Children grow up seeing their mothers apply dust to their faces, and they learn the gesture before they understand its purpose. By the time they are old enough to feel the desert sting directly, the movement has already become instinct. They know when the wind shifts, when the air begins to burn, when the sun changes angle. Their hands reach automatically for the earth beneath them, spreading a small amount across their skin as naturally as others would reach for sunscreen. The difference is striking where one world relies on bottles and chemicals, the other relies on the land itself. Some might imagine these coatings create discomfort or heaviness, but the opposite is true. A thin layer of dust or clay reduces friction between fabric and skin, preventing rashes and irritation. It softens the impact of wind-blown sand. It prevents heat from settling too deeply into the pores. It works with the body rather than against it. In an environment where danger comes quietly and constantly, these small advantages accumulate into real protection. Women also understand that the desert watches for weakness. Skin that is too clean becomes fragile. Skin that is scrubbed too often loses resilience. They rarely remove all the dust at once. Instead, they let the natural coat remain unless it causes harm. Cleanliness is achieved through balance, not erasure. The goal is not to expose the skin, but to preserve it. This philosophy shapes every gesture, every routine, every seemingly simple decision they make about their bodies. To call these coatings dirt is to misunderstand the relationship between people and their environment. In the Sahara, the earth is both a threat and a resource. It is abrasive when it moves, but protective when applied with care. It reveals its danger and its usefulness at the same time. Women do not romanticize this duality. They simply work with it. They know exactly what the land can do, and they shape their routines accordingly. The coating on their faces is not neglected. It is wisdom. It is survival. It is the quiet acknowledgement that here in this place, cleanliness cannot be separated from the land itself. The desert gives little, but it gives enough for those who know how to listen. Their use of dust, ash, and clay transforms the harshest elements into a subtle armor for the skin. From this unlikely protection, another practice begins to surface, one shaped by scarcity rather than preference. Hidden within that practice is a method so ordinary to them that outsiders rarely recognize its purpose. Bathing in the Sahara rarely involves water. Water is too precious, too limited, too tightly guarded to be poured over the body in any casual gesture. Instead, women turn to the one resource the desert offers without hesitation: sand. To someone unfamiliar with this environment, the idea of cleaning with sand may seem contradictory or even absurd. But in the Sahara, sand becomes a form of hygiene, shaped by necessity, refined by experience, and trusted because it works. The process is simple but deliberate. Women let fine sand run across their skin, allowing it to absorb sweat that clings to the body after hours under the sun. Sweat, when left too long, becomes a magnet for heat and irritation. Sand pulls it away, cooling the skin and preventing the sticky layer from trapping dust in uncomfortable patterns. The grains cling lightly at first, then fall away as the body moves, carrying sweat and debris with them. This dry cleansing leaves the skin steadier, less reactive, and more capable of enduring the next wave of heat. The texture of the sand matters. Not all grains are suitable. Women select patches where the earth is softest, where sand slips between the fingers with a smoothness that almost disguises its abrasive nature. Coarse sand cuts the skin, but fine sand polishes it. It removes dead cells, reduces friction beneath clothing, and softens rough areas that would otherwise crack under the desert's constant pressure. The movement is repetitive, quiet, and almost meditative. Though meditation is not the goal, survival is. Sand is poured onto the shoulders, rubbed along the arms, pressed gently into the palms. On the legs, it works deeper, loosening dirt that gathers behind the knees and along the ankles. Women use their hands with remarkable precision, knowing exactly how much pressure the skin can take without damage. They brush the sand away in slow, sweeping motions, leaving behind a surface that feels lighter, renewed. though not in the way a bath might refresh the body elsewhere. The desert does not offer luxury, it offers function. To an outsider, this ritual might appear harsh. It is almost amusing how people from milder climates flinch at the idea of using abrasive grains on the skin, while women here treat those grains as a gentle ally. The difference lies not in tolerance but in adaptation. Where others expect softness, these women expect resistance. Their bodies have learned to work with what the land provides, reshaping discomfort into a tool. I often reflect on how sand reveals its usefulness only when observed closely. It resembles repairing a fragile machine using materials available on the ground rather than tools designed for precision. In less forgiving places, such a method would seem crude. Here, it is intelligent. I find myself appreciating how the desert teaches efficiency through scarcity. Every gesture matters, every grain plays its part. This dry bath carries another advantage: it preserves natural oils that protect the skin from heat. Water washes these oils away, leaving the body exposed. Sand, however, removes debris while leaving essential oils intact. This balance is critical in preventing the skin from splitting or overheating. Women learn to read the skin's response, adjusting their cleansing routine depending on the day, the weather, or the demands placed on their bodies. Sweat, when evaporated too quickly, becomes a danger. It cools the body briefly, but leaves behind dryness that intensifies heat damage. Sand slows this cycle, giving the skin more time to regulate itself. In this way, the dry bath is not only cleansing but stabilizing. It keeps the body from sliding too quickly into dehydration or irritation. It is a form of care disguised as abrasion. Children observe these routines with curiosity. They imitate the motions, rubbing sand on their arms or legs, even before understanding why. Their mothers do not always explain. The lessons come from repetition, not instruction. Over time, the children learn to discern the difference between helpful sand and harmful sand, between a cleansing stroke and one that invites discomfort. They grow up knowing that bathwater is a luxury their environment cannot afford, but cleanliness is still within reach through less obvious means. Sand also serves as a deodorizer. It absorbs oils and residues that would otherwise produce unpleasant smells. In a place where sweat is constant but water is rare, this subtle effect becomes essential. Women know how to apply it to areas where odor gathers, brushing it away before it clings too deeply to the skin. The desert in this way helps maintain dignity, even as it threatens to strip it away. Some may consider sand an imperfect substitute for water, but perfection has no meaning in the Sahara. Practicality replaces expectation. Efficiency replaces comfort. A dry bath with sand is not inferior. It is adapted. It is formed by a relationship with the land that relies more on realism than desire. Women do not ask the desert to change. They adjust themselves to its rules. In the end, cleansing with sand is not an improvisation. It is a refined technique shaped by generations of living with harsh conditions. It aligns the body with the environment rather than resisting it. Sand becomes not an obstacle, but an extension of survival, smoothing the line between human and landscape. Their dry baths turn the desert's most abundant resource into a quiet substitute for water. From this surprising method, another essential habit begins to reveal its purpose in daily life. Somewhere within that habit lies a focus so specific that it reshapes the way the body is cared for under the desert sun. Caring for the body in the Sahara does not begin with grand rituals or full baths. It begins with precision. Women here know that the desert attacks selectively, striking hardest at the points where the body meets the outside world: the hands, the feet, the eyes, the mouth, the ears. These are the openings through which danger enters, the gateways that the wind, dust, and heat exploit with relentless consistency. Cleanliness, therefore, is not a matter of tending to everything at once, but tending to the areas that matter most. Hands are cleaned first, not because they must appear neat, but because they touch everything the desert contaminates. They meet the coarse fabric used to shield the skin, the rough tools needed for daily tasks, and the heated surfaces that burn unexpectedly. Dirt gathers beneath the nails, sand settles into the creases of the knuckles, and sweat mixes with dust to form a layer that can irritate or infect. Women wipe their hands carefully with a cloth brush, sand from the palms, and use small amounts of water only when necessary. The desert teaches them that hands must remain manageable, not pristine. Feet follow the same logic. They bear the weight of walking on hot ground, pressing against sand that has absorbed sunlight all day. Even through layers of cloth or leather, heat seeps inward. Cracks form easily along the heels and toes, and once a crack forms, it widens with every step. Women clean their feet with patient, deliberate strokes, removing sand that accumulates between the toes, where friction can quickly turn into pain. It is almost darkly amusing how, in a place where the horizon stretches endlessly, survival depends on such small, specific details, like the space between two toes. Eyes demand even greater attention. The wind forces dust into them without mercy, coating the lashes and settling beneath the lids. Women blink often, allowing tears to wash away irritants naturally. They shield their eyes with fabric, squint against the brightness, and clean the corners, gently using a clean cloth or fine sand that has been shaken to remove impurities. Infection is a constant threat. A single grain of sand can inflame the eye for days, turning simple tasks into agony. The mouth is not spared. The desert dries, the lips pulls moisture from the tongue, and carries grit that slips between the teeth. Women cover their faces, breathe through cloth, and clean their mouths with what limited means they have. Water is used sparingly. So much of this care involves wiping, brushing, or using natural materials to keep the mouth functional. A dry mouth weakens the body quickly. Hydration is precious, and anything that protects the lips from cracking helps preserve it. Ears are often overlooked by outsiders, yet women in the Sahara tend to them carefully. Dust creeps inward, settling in folds where it cannot be felt at first. Over time, it builds into irritation, even infection. Women clean the edges with a cloth, tilt their heads, to allow sand to fall out and avoid covering the ears too tightly, as trapped heat can worsen discomfort. Their movements seem small, almost invisible, but they are vital. Every bit of care prevents harm that the desert would otherwise inflict without hesitation. These routines reveal something essential. Survival does not require the entire body to be spotless. It requires the right places to be tended with precision. It resembles maintaining a complex machine by focusing on the joints and hinges, rather than polishing the entire surface. The desert forces this mechanical understanding of the body, where modern cultures celebrate full-body purity. Women here aim for functionality. I find myself quietly admiring how this clarity strips hygiene down to its most necessary form. Full body washing is rare and risky. Removing too much natural oil exposes the skin to heat and dryness. Water is saved for drinking, not rinsing. The desert demands that women choose which parts of the body receive attention, and they do so with the calm certainty of those who have learned through experience. The body cannot be cleaned entirely every day, but it can be protected in the places where failure would be catastrophic. This targeted care becomes a rhythm. Hands are brushed clean before handling food. Feet are examined each night for cracks. Eyes wiped after every gust of wind. Mouths covered during travel. Ears checked for sand. These gestures are repeated quietly, without ceremony, blending into the background of daily life. They form a pattern that carries women through the harshest conditions with surprising resilience. Children learn this pattern early. They are taught not to fear dirt, but to understand which dirt matters. They wipe their eyes before complaining of discomfort. They clean their hands after digging in the sand. They watch their mothers press cloth around their faces and copy the motion instinctively. Hygiene becomes instinct rather than instruction. In a place where the environment works tirelessly to break the human body, women preserve themselves, not through grand rituals, but through careful attention to the points where vulnerability begins. Cleanliness becomes a strategy. Survival becomes a skill. The desert demands nothing less. Their focus on specific parts of the body reveals how survival depends not on perfection, but on precision. From this selective care, another practice begins to emerge, one shaped by the harsh logic of scarcity. Hidden within that practice lies a method so subtle that many overlook why it matters at all. Bathing in most parts of the world is considered a daily marker of routine, an expected cleansing, a reassurance that the body has been reset. But in the Sahara, bathing is a decision, not a habit. Women here do not avoid daily baths because they lack discipline or desire cleanliness. They avoid them because water reshapes the body in ways that the desert punishes. To survive this environment, they must understand what the skin needs, rather than what custom dictates. And the truth the Sahara teaches is simple: less bathing means more protection. The skin holds a thin layer of natural oil that defends it from dryness, heat, and irritation. In a place where the wind behaves like a scraping tool and the sun burns without mercy, this oil becomes essential. Washing removes it, leaving the surface vulnerable almost raw. Women know this instinctively. They wash only when necessary, preserving the oil that keeps their skin from splitting. A body freshly rinsed might feel clean elsewhere, but here freshly rinsed means freshly exposed. Water, for all its importance, destabilizes the body's equilibrium when used unwisely. A sudden drop in temperature from bathing can force the skin to work harder to regulate its warmth afterward. In the desert, where the balance between heat and dryness is already precarious, this shift can cause headaches, fatigue, or a faster loss of hydration. Women learn to treat water with respect, using it in ways that strengthen rather than weaken the body. It is almost darkly humorous how in some places people chase cold showers for refreshment, while here such a thing might set off a chain of exhaustion. I often think about how deeply these routines contradict modern expectations. It resembles maintaining a delicate structure by leaving certain parts untouched because touching them too often causes damage. Cleanliness in this environment is not about removing everything that clings to the skin. It is about preserving what the skin creates for itself. I find myself quietly admiring how these women understand the body, not through theory but through the consequences the desert delivers. Skipping a bath does not mean skipping hygiene. Women continue to clean the parts of the body that require attention, hands, feet, eyes, and mouth, while leaving the rest undisturbed. They rely on sand, ash, cloth, and oils to maintain cleanliness, without weakening the skin's defenses. This selective approach is not laziness, it is a strategy. They know exactly which parts need cleansing and when. The desert does not reward those who overdo anything, especially washing. Their routines follow the rhythm of the climate, rather than the rhythm of custom. A windy day may lead them to avoid water entirely, letting dust settle gently, forming a protective layer. A calmer day might allow for limited washing hands and feet, rinsed with small portions of water faces, wiped gently but not scrubbed. A full body wash is rare and reserved for moments when the body absolutely requires renewal, not simply when a clock says it is time. Children learn early that water is never wasted. They watch their mothers pour small amounts into bowls, use it sparingly, and stretch every drop. When they wash, they dab, not pour. They wipe, not soak. Bathing becomes a careful craft, a matter of controlling exposure. The desert turns hygiene into an intimate negotiation between body and environment. Women understand that overwashing leads to more harm than good. Removing oils leaves the skin defenseless, and dryness arrives quickly, bringing cracks and irritation. Once damaged, the skin demands more resources than the desert can spare, so they keep baths minimal, preserving strength instead of chasing a temporary feeling of freshness. Cleanliness for them is durability. Water also draws heat from the body when it evaporates. In cooler climates, this effect might feel pleasant. In the Sahara, it can lead to dizziness or a dangerous drop in hydration. Women guard against this by washing only during specific times, when the sun is lower, when shade covers the camp, and when winds are gentle. Even the timing of a bath becomes part of survival. Their approach reveals an understanding of the body that is both instinctive and refined. They do not seek to remove the marks left by the desert, but to maintain balance within them. Dirt is not always an enemy. Sweat is not always something to erase. The body's natural responses are respected, not corrected. Hygiene becomes a harmony between what the body wants and what the environment allows. For outsiders, this restraint may seem strange, but in truth, the desert rewards restraint more than excess. Women who conserve water, preserve oils, and avoid unnecessary washing carry themselves with greater ease through the heat. Their skin remains stronger, their energy steadier, their endurance higher. Cleanliness is achieved not by stripping the body down, but by protecting what keeps it whole. Skipping daily baths is not a compromise. It is wisdom shaped by the land itself. These women do not aim to meet aesthetic standards or follow traditional expectations. They aim to remain unbroken in a place that breaks everything eventually. Their selective use of water reveals how survival depends on maintaining the body's natural defenses rather than washing them away. From this careful restraint, another practice begins to unfold, one grounded in the sense the desert itself provides. Within that unfolding lies a custom so subtle that many fail to see how deeply it shapes the meaning of cleanliness. Scent in the Sahara is not a luxury. It is a quiet declaration that the body is still holding its ground against a landscape that strips everything down to its barest form. Women here do not seek strong perfumes or elaborate concoctions. They reach instead for what the land itself offers: leaves, resin bark, and dried herbs that release their fragrance slowly, almost reluctantly. Cleanliness becomes a matter of subtlety, a practice built not on overpowering aromas, but on faint traces that signal health balance and resilience. The desert provides only a few plants capable of surviving its extremes, yet those plants carry remarkable properties. Dried herbs release gentle, earthy scents when warmed by the skin. Tree resins harden in the heat and break open with a fragrance that lingers for hours. These scents are never overwhelming. They rise softly, carried by the wind rather than forced into it. Women tuck small bundles beneath layers of cloth, allowing the fragrance to settle around them with a kind of modest confidence. Some plants offer more than scent. They offer protection. Their oils contain mild antibacterial qualities that help prevent irritation or infection. When rubbed lightly on the skin or burned in small amounts, they help clean the air around sleeping spaces or soften the harshness left by dust and heat. It is quietly ironic that in a world obsessed with industrial sanitizers, the Sahara relies on fragile stems and hardened sap to achieve the same purpose. These fragrances are never used to mask filth. They exist to confirm cleanliness. It resembles a quiet stamp of approval, less about altering the body, and more about acknowledging that the body is being cared for properly. A faint scent means the skin has been tended, the essential points of hygiene maintained, and the natural oils preserved. I find myself drawn to this restrained understanding of what it means to smell clean, free of the aggressive expectations modern life imposes. To gather these materials, women walk at dusk or dawn, when the heat is calm enough to tolerate. They know where each plant grows, where the earth cracks open just enough to support roots, where shade falls long enough to protect fragile stems. They pluck leaves, scrape resin from bark, and tie everything in small cloth bundles. These bundles dry over time, becoming compact sources of scent that last for weeks. Nothing is wasted. Even brittle fading herbs can be burned gently to refresh a room. Scent routines are woven into moments of stillness. Women warm resins between their fingers and press the softened fragments to their wrists or behind their ears. They rub leaves on cloth before wrapping them over the nose and mouth. They place small pieces beneath head coverings so that every breath carries a trace of fragrance. These gestures are quiet, almost invisible, but deeply intentional. Each scent is chosen not for beauty but for balance. Children notice these practices early. They watch their mothers smell a leaf before storing it or crumble a resin bead between their hands. They learn which scents signal that someone has recently cleaned their hands or tended their face, and which scents warn that a person may be ill or exhausted. Cleanliness becomes something they recognize, not just through sight, but through the air around them. The desert amplifies everything unpleasant: sweat, heat, dust, and stagnation. Without natural fragrances, discomfort would spread quickly. These subtle scents soften the harsh edges of daily life, creating pockets of comfort in a place that rarely offers any. They are not used to seduce or impress. They are used to reassure, to remind the body that not everything in the desert is hostile. Burning herbs is another ritual. Women place dried leaves into small bowls, allowing smoke to drift around clothing and blankets. The smoke carries antibacterial properties that help maintain cleanliness when water or soap is scarce. It seeps into fabric, leaving behind a hint of scent that lingers through the day. Homes become marked by these subtle aromas, forming a shared identity of cleanliness unique to each family. These routines also help maintain emotional steadiness. Fragrance becomes a companion, a quiet anchor that calms the senses. In a place where survival demands constant vigilance, such calmness is valuable. The scents do not overpower. They gently reassure, weaving themselves into the rhythm of breath and movement. What stands out most is the restraint. Women do not seek to transform their scent. They aim only to preserve the body's equilibrium. Excess is avoided because excess attracts discomfort. A strong fragrance feels out of place here, almost disrespectful to the land. The desert has no tolerance for arrogance, even in something as small as scent. Cleanliness in the Sahara does not shine or shimmer. It whispers. It moves through the air in small, controlled doses, shaped by the plants that have learned to survive alongside those who depend on them. Through fragrance, women maintain not just hygiene but dignity, a sense of order that the desert cannot erase. Their use of subtle scents shows how cleanliness becomes a quiet conversation between the body and the land. Within these fragrant gestures grows another practice shaped not by elegance, but by necessity. Hidden beneath that necessity appears a form of protection so understated that few ever realize how much it shields them. Perfume in much of the world is something extracted, distilled, bottled, and sold as a crafted luxury. But in the Sahara, fragrance comes from the earth itself. Dry branches, brittle leaves, resin gathered from trees that survive by narrowing themselves to the bare edge of possibility. Women here do not search for elaborate scents. They choose whatever the land offers because the land decides what remains alive long enough to be found. Cleanliness, once again, becomes something shaped not by abundance, but by scarcity. There are no glass bottles, no ornate stoppers, no oils processed in workshops. Fragrance is carried in a few dried twigs, tucked beneath a layer of cloth, or in a bead of resin warmed by the heat of the skin. These scents are faint, almost ghost-like, but they hold a purpose far more practical than seduction or display. They counter the sharpness of sweat, the heaviness of heat, and the unmistakable sourness that emerges when the body is pushed beyond its limits. The desert does not forgive strong odors, because strong odors signal distress. Women gather scented branches with the same quiet patience they apply to every survival ritual. They study the plants that manage to root themselves in soil that looks incapable of supporting anything at all. Some shrubs produce leaves that release fragrance only when crushed. Others yield resin that clings to the fingers, softening in the warmth and releasing a subtle aroma that stays close to the body. Nothing is wasted. A single twig may last days, even weeks, as long as it is kept dry and intact. The absence of chemicals or containers is not a limitation. It is a reflection of what matters. It is almost darkly amusing how in other societies perfume racks shimmer with dozens of glass bottles, while here scent begins with a twig small enough to slip into a closed fist. The modesty of these materials aligns with the landscape: no excess, no show, just enough fragrance to balance the body within its harsh surroundings. Women slide the branches beneath their scarves, letting the plant's aroma mingle with their breath. They prefer fragrances that do not dominate, scents that rise gently only when the wind shifts or when the body heats during work. To them, a clean scent is not about attracting attention. It is about ensuring that no unpleasant odor signals an imbalance or illness. It resembles adjusting the smallest screw in a machine to ensure that everything continues working quietly without drawing notice. I find myself impressed by how this minimalism feels more honest than the dramatic approach of modern perfumery. Sweat in the Sahara is inevitable. It mixes with dust, dries on the skin, and returns with every step. A strong perfume would not disguise it. It would fight with it, creating a sourness far worse than the original smell. The dried branches avoid this entirely. They soften the scent of sweat rather than overwhelming it, giving the body room to breathe in an environment where breath often feels like a negotiation. Women also burn small bundles of dried plants. The smoke drifts through clothing and into hair, carrying a neutralizing quality that helps control lingering odors. It is never heavy smoke, just enough to settle lightly. Homes, scarves, blankets, and garments absorb this fragrance, turning it into a signature of cleanliness recognized across families and tribes. Each home smells slightly different, shaped by whatever plants were available at the time. The choice of scent also reveals emotional understanding. Fragrance steadies the mind. A faint herbal smell woven through layers of cloth offers comfort during long walks or difficult days. It creates a quiet barrier between the individual and the environment, a softness against the harshness of wind and heat. These women know that a clear mind can be as essential to survival as a clean body. In these routines, nothing is random. Women test each plant before committing to it. They smell the leaves, break them open, warm them between their fingers, and decide whether the scent is too sharp, too faint, or just right. Their decisions rely on memory and experience rather than instruction. A scent that remains stable through heat is valued. One that disappears quickly is set aside. One that irritates the skin is avoided entirely. The desert is unforgiving, and even fragrance requires discipline. Cleanliness, in this context, is not defined by the presence of perfume, but by the absence of unpleasantness. To smell neutral is to be clean. To smell faintly of dried leaves is to be cared for. Strong fragrances belong to other worlds, worlds where people can afford indulgence. Here, indulgence evaporates as quickly as water spilled on hot sand. Scent becomes a subtle marker of identity. A woman's fragrance reflects her environment, her skill, her access to the right plants, and her understanding of how much is enough. It tells a quiet story about her routines, her attention to detail, and her respect for the land that shapes every choice. In a place where survival is fragile, Even the smallest detail reveals competence. What emerges most clearly is that fragrance is not used to impress anyone. It is used to maintain equilibrium. Dried branches and resins operate as tools, not decorations. They form the final layer of hygiene, light, natural, and functional. Cleanliness in the Sahara is measured not by how much scent someone wears, but by how harmoniously that scent fits into the desert's silence. Their use of dried branches as perfume reveals how cleanliness becomes a form of quiet restraint rather than display. From this restraint rises another layer of protection, rooted not in scent, but in shielding the face from what the desert carries. Within that shielding lies a practice so ordinary at first glance that its role in survival often goes unnoticed. A face covering in the Sahara is not merely a piece of cloth pulled across the mouth. It is a boundary, a shield that stands between the body and an environment shaped to erode it. Women here do not treat the scarf as a decoration or a custom. They treat it as quiet armor. The desert, with its scorching winds and constant movement of sand, targets the most vulnerable openings of the human body: the mouth, the nose, and the skin around the lips. A single gust can deliver a punishment that lingers for days. The scarf becomes the first and most reliable defense. Hot winds carry fine sand that slips into every exposed space. Without protection, the grains scrape the inside of the nose, dry the throat, and leave a raw sting behind the lips. Women wrap their scarves tightly enough to block this assault, yet loosely enough to breathe without strain. They learn how to adjust the layers, depending on the weather, doubling the thickness when the wind turns violent, loosening it when the air rests for a moment. This balance is essential. Too tight, and breathing becomes a burden. Too loose, and the desert enters freely. Moisture is equally fragile here. The skin around the mouth loses hydration faster than anywhere else. Lips crack, bleed, and peel when left unprotected. A scarf traps just enough humidity to soften the air that passes through it, reducing the harshness that would otherwise strip the skin dry. It acts like a barrier that catches the exhaled moisture and returns a small amount with each breath. It is almost bleakly funny how this simple cloth outperforms many expensive products designed to soften the air elsewhere. The scarf also protects the nose, which suffers from constant dryness. Sand inhaled into the nasal passages causes inflammation and makes breathing painful. Women understand that prevention is the only solution. They adjust the folds of the scarf so that air passes through several layers of fabric, forcing the wind to slow and the dust to settle before reaching the face. It resembles a human-made filter, far more effective than many modern attempts at convenience. I find myself quietly admiring how such minimal materials achieve a level of protection that technology often complicates. The scarf's role extends beyond shielding from dust. It helps maintain the warmth of the breath in colder nights, preventing the sudden chill that can cause headaches or strain the lungs. During the hottest hours, the cloth prevents the sun from heating the skin directly, reducing the risk of burns around the cheeks and chin. In this way, the scarf becomes a kind of climate regulator, adjusting what the face experiences without changing the environment around it. Women often dampen the inside of the scarf when water allows. A lightly moistened layer cools the air as it passes through, offering brief relief from heat. But this is done sparingly. Water is precious, and the cloth must never be soaked. Too much moisture attracts more sand, which sticks to the fibers and becomes abrasive. Precision matters. Every adjustment responds to what the desert demands that day. Scarves vary in thickness, weave, and length. Some women prefer tightly woven cloth for high winds. Others choose lighter fabric for everyday use. Colors reflect practicality, not vanity. Dark shades absorb heat during cold mornings, while lighter tones reflect sunlight at noon. Even these variations show how deeply women understand the desert's rhythms. Nothing is chosen without purpose. Children learn quickly how to use their own scarves. They mimic their mothers, pulling cloth across their faces as soon as the wind shifts. They learn to breathe steadily through layers of fabric, to tuck the ends so nothing flaps loose, and to avoid touching the inside of the scarf with dirty hands. These habits become reflexes. Inside the mouth, covering another benefit, emerges reduced irritation from dust that would otherwise settle on the teeth and gums. Even small amounts of sand wear down enamel or inflame the soft tissues of the mouth. The scarf prevents this intrusion. Combined with natural methods of cleaning teeth, it becomes an essential part of oral hygiene, though it may not appear so at first glance. At night, scarves continue their work. They keep insects away from the face, warm the breath in cold hours, and prevent the dryness that comes from sleeping in open air. One might think of them as a form of intimacy, a layer of cloth that stays close to the skin, absorbing traces of daily struggle while offering quiet protection. A scarf in the Sahara is not an accessory, it is a personal barrier against the world's most relentless elements. It allows women to walk through storms, speak in dusty air, and breathe where breathing should be difficult. Its simplicity hides its intelligence. The desert shapes the scarf, and the scarf helps shape survival. Their mastery of the face covering shows how protection becomes a daily ritual rather than an occasional need. Within that ritual emerges another form of hygiene shaped not by cloth, but by the tools used directly on the body. Among those tools lies one practice so enduring that it defines how cleanliness begins each morning. Cleanliness in the Sahara begins at the mouth, not because of appearance, but because the desert punishes any weakness found there. Teeth must stay strong, breath must stay steady, and the gums must resist infection in an environment where water is scarce and dust enters without invitation. Women here do not rely on powders or pastes or tools shaped in factories. They rely on branches, thin pieces of siwak or palm fronds that have been trimmed, softened, and prepared through methods passed quietly from one generation to the next. The siwak branch, taken from specific desert shrubs, carries natural antibacterial properties. When chewed lightly at one end, its fibers separate into soft bristles. Women know how long to chew, how much pressure to use, and when the branch is ready. The softened end foams slightly when rubbed across the teeth, creating a natural lather drawn from the plant's oils. This foam is not dramatic, but it performs the essential work of cleaning without irritating the mouth. In a place where the throat dries quickly and gums crack painfully, gentleness is not a luxury, it is a requirement. Palm fronds are used similarly, though their fibers differ. They are scraped, rolled, and shaped into thin brushes. These tools may look primitive to someone unfamiliar with the desert, but primitive does not mean ineffective. It is almost darkly amusing how a trimmed twig accomplishes what many modern products claim to do with complicated formulas. The desert does not reward unnecessary complexity, and these women have long understood that truth. The brushing process takes time not because it demands effort, but because it demands attention. Each movement is deliberate, woven into the rhythm of morning and evening. Dust slips easily into the mouth while breathing through cloth, and food dries quickly in the heat, clinging stubbornly to the teeth. Brushing removes these traces before they become threats. The act is mechanical, quiet, steady. It resembles maintaining a delicate instrument by tending to every surface, rather than rushing the task. I find myself admiring how this slow ritual becomes a form of discipline more than a matter of aesthetics. The siwak does more than clean. It freshens the breath with a scent that is sharp but pleasant, aligning naturally with the fragrances of dried herbs already used in daily hygiene. This natural pairing is not designed. It simply emerges from the land itself, where every scent comes from plants shaped by the same harsh conditions. Breath becomes part of the desert's rhythm, dry, warm, but clean enough to signal health. Gums benefit most from this practice. Cracked or inflamed gums invite infection, and infection spreads quickly when medical help is distant. The natural compounds in siwak reduce swelling and fight bacteria without stripping the mouth of moisture. A modern mouthwash would burn dry and ultimately worsen the condition. The branch, however, aligns with what the mouth already knows. It cleans without harm. Women also understand how long each branch remains effective. A siwak used too long becomes brittle. One used too little is wasteful. The desert teaches a kind of timing that cannot be written in instructions. When the bristles weaken, the branch is trimmed and softened again. When the fibers become too short, a new branch is prepared. Nothing is hurried, nothing ignored. These transitions mirror the way desert life works: steady maintenance, gradual renewal, no sudden breaks. Children begin this practice early. A mother gives her child a small branch, soft enough not to injure, firm enough to teach pressure. The child watches the motions forward and back, small circles and gentle scrubbing near the gums. They mimic first, then understand. Cleanliness becomes part of their identity long before it becomes a responsibility. They come to know that a clean mouth is not merely pleasant. It is crucial in a place where illness steals strength quickly. Some women carry their siwak tucked in their scarves or tied at the waist with a thin rope. It is a personal tool needed at different moments throughout the day. After meals, after long walks, after talking against strong winds, they brush again, not from vanity but from necessity. These routines mark the day as reliably as sunrise and sunset. When visiting neighbors or preparing food, a clean mouth is a sign of respect. Not a display, not decoration, but an acknowledgement of shared hardship. Bad breath is not merely unpleasant. It suggests imbalance, fatigue, or a body under strain. To remain clean is to remain stable. The desert notices instability immediately, and so do the people who live in it. The siwak's durability also matters. Unlike fragile tools that break in heat or warp with moisture, the branch remains usable in extreme temperatures. It can survive hours beneath the sun, days tucked in cloth, or weeks stored with other herbs. This resilience reflects the landscape from which it comes. Plants that refuse to die, even when the world around them offers no encouragement. In this environment, modern tools would fail quickly. Toothpaste dries out, plastic cracks and bristles melt or deform. The desert strips away anything artificial. A branch, however, stays dependable. It absorbs the conditions of its surroundings rather than resisting them. What strikes most is how natural this ritual feels to the women who live here. They do not romanticize it or exaggerate its importance. It is simply part of survival, woven seamlessly into daily life. Clean teeth mean the ability to eat without pain. Strong gums mean enduring hard foods and hot weather. Fresh breath means comfort within one's own body. Cleanliness of the mouth is not about impressing anyone. It is about protecting the body from the smallest threats that accumulate quietly. In the Sahara, the smallest threats are often the most dangerous. The siwak stands as a silent guardian against them. Their use of branches as toothbrushes reveals how hygiene becomes a negotiation between the body and the land, rather than a battle against it. From that negotiation arises another practice shaped by the same scarcity, one that cleans not with liquid, but with minerals pulled from the fire. Within those minerals lies a method so unexpected that its effectiveness often surprises those who first witness it. Hair in the Sahara carries its own challenges. Dust settles into it easily. Sweat dries along the strands, and heat builds beneath the layers of cloth meant to shield the scalp from the sun. Water, however, is too precious to waste on washing hair regularly, and shampoo is a concept that belongs to another world entirely. Women here maintain clean, healthy hair through methods shaped by the landscape itself, methods that rely not on liquids, but on minerals pulled from the earth and remnants lifted from the fire. Clay becomes the first tool, gathered from specific patches of ground where the soil is fine, and naturally filtered clay absorbs oil without stripping the scalp. Women crush it into a soft powder, rub it between their hands, and apply it to the roots of the hair. The clay clings to excess oil, dust, and sweat, binding with everything the desert leaves behind. As they massage it across the scalp, the grains lift impurities without irritating. There is no lather, no scent, no glossy sheen, only the quiet knowledge that something heavy has been removed. When the clay begins to settle, they shake it out gently or brush it through the strands. The movement releases a faint cloud of dust that floats away in the dry air, leaving the hair lighter and cleaner. It is an understated ritual, one that might appear incomplete to someone expecting the shine of wet hair after a bath. But here, dryness is the point. The hair remains strong because no moisture has been taken from it. The scalp remains calm because no harsh chemicals interfere with its natural balance. Ash offers another form of cleansing. Taken from controlled fires, where wood burns evenly, ash develops a mild alkalinity that soothes the scalp and neutralizes odors. Women sift the ash until it becomes soft and fine, removing any larger fragments that might scratch the skin. Then they apply it in small amounts, massaging with careful pressure. The ash absorbs oil just as the clay does, but it also calms irritation that may have built up from days of heat and sweat. It is almost darkly amusing how something many would consider dirty becomes a tool for cleanliness here. Ash, which elsewhere might signal neglect, becomes essential in the desert because it cooperates with the body instead of working against it. The women do not hesitate to use what the environment gives them, even if those materials appear unconventional to outsiders. The scalp responds differently to these treatments compared to modern shampoos. It resembles maintaining a fragile ecosystem, adjusting conditions slowly rather than shocking it with chemical solutions. The clay cools the skin, the ash restores balance, and neither disrupts the natural oils that protect the hair from heat. I find myself respecting how intentionally these women preserve what the body already knows how to produce. Hair washed with earth and ash develops a particular texture, thick, resilient, and naturally matte. It does not shine artificially, but it moves with weight and strength, Strands resist breakage because they are not dehydrated week after week. The desert rewards this approach. Shiny, brittle hair would not survive here. Strength matters more than appearance. Women understand when their hair needs attention and when it is better left alone. Too much clay can dry the scalp. Too much ash can upset the balance. They use these materials in rotation, guided by the state of their skin, the temperature of the day, and the amount of dust carried by the wind. These decisions are not made lightly. They are the product of generations, observing how the body reacts to the desert's endless demands. Children learn this method early. Mothers rub clay into their hair with gentle hands, teaching them to sit still as the powder is worked through each section. They shake their heads happily when the clay is brushed out, watching dust fall, like soft fragments of the landscape they belong to. Clean hair becomes something recognizable, not by look but by feel. Cooler, lighter, calmer. In households, clay is stored in small bags tied with rope, kept dry away from sleeping areas. Ash is sifted and placed in bowls, always ready for use. These materials require no preservation because the desert itself preserves them. The air dries everything, preventing mold or decay. Even the movement of sand helps filter impurities from the clay, as if the land contributes silently to the process. Some women blend clay with dried herbs to add a faint scent, though this is optional and depends on availability. The herbs do not transform the cleaning power, they simply soften the experience. But most rely solely on the minerals themselves, trusting in their effectiveness. To an outsider, using earth and ash might seem primitive. But primitive is a word that misunderstands necessity. The desert strips life to its essentials, and hair care is no exception. Cleanliness becomes an act of cooperation with the land rather than resistance against it. These women do not force their hair to comply with unrealistic standards. They allow it to adapt, shaping it according to what survival requires. What results is hair that endures heat, wind, and sand, not because it is polished, but because it remains wholesome and balanced. The clay and ash leave no artificial trace. They are invisible once shaken out, like the silent systems that sustain life in environments where excess is dangerous. Clean hair in the Sahara is not glossy. It is steady, durable, and unbothered by the landscape around it. Their use of earth and ash to clean hair reveals how hygiene reshapes itself when water becomes a luxury instead of a habit. From this reshaping emerges another layer of protection, one woven into clothing rather than applied to the body. Buried in that layer appears a principle so practical that it quietly changes the way survival is worn. Washing the hair without water may seem contradictory in many parts of the world, but in the Sahara, it is a logical response to a landscape that punishes excess and rewards restraint. Here, water is not simply scarce. It is a resource that determines survival. Women understand that every drop must be protected, measured, and applied with intention. Cleansing the hair without using water is not an improvisation. It is a practice refined over generations, shaped by the desert's relentless demands. The process begins with ash. After a fire has burned long enough for wood to collapse into soft powder, women gather the remains carefully. They sift the ash through cloth to remove any sharp fragments, leaving only the fine material that will not injure the scalp. Once prepared, the ash is stored in small pouches, ready to be used when the hair grows heavy with oil, dust, and sweat. Applying the ash requires precision. Women sprinkle small amounts onto their fingertips and massage them gently into the scalp. The ash clings to oil and dirt, immediately binding to anything that does not belong. The movements are slow, almost meditative, as the ash lifts impurities without harming the skin. After enough time has passed, they brush or shake the ash from their hair, releasing the dust into the wind. What remains is hair that feels lighter, cleaner, and surprisingly refreshed. Clay can be used in the same way, though ash is often preferred because it is softer and easier to apply. Clay provides a cooling effect, while ash offers balance. Both materials are aligned with the desert. They behave predictably in the dryness and heat, unlike substances that require moisture to activate. It is almost darkly humorous how this so-called primitive method resembles the modern invention of dry shampoo. Yet here it existed centuries earlier, without marketing or packaging. The scalp benefits most from this technique. Water, when misused, disrupts the natural oils that protect the skin, leaving it dry and irritated. Ash, on the other hand, absorbs only what is excessive. It preserves the oils that prevent cracking, peeling, and discomfort. Women understand the difference intuitively. They know when the scalp needs attention and when it is better left alone. It resembles maintaining a delicate surface with the lightest possible touch instead of scrubbing it into weakness. I find myself quietly admiring how this restraint produces cleaner, healthier results than the aggressive routines often encouraged elsewhere. This method suits the environment perfectly. Water evaporates instantly in the Sahara, leaving the hair more brittle than before. Wet hair also attracts sand, which sticks stubbornly to damp strands and causes irritation. Ash avoids all of these problems. It keeps the hair dry, stable, and easy to manage. The desert rewards this dryness. Anything wet becomes vulnerable. There is also a psychological dimension to the practice. The gentle act of massaging ash into the scalp slows the day for a moment. It becomes a ritual of grounding, quiet hands, steady movements, dust rising softly into the air. Cleanliness in the Sahara is never rushed. It always mirrors the controlled pace of survival itself. Children learn the technique early. A mother might sprinkle ash onto a child's scalp, showing them how to distribute it evenly. The child laughs as the ash poofs into the air, then watches as their hair becomes lighter and less sticky. They learn to identify the moment when their scalp feels heavy and needs attention again. The method becomes instinct long before it becomes knowledge. Ash has another role. It neutralizes odors. Sweat that dries on the scalp can carry a sourness that persists through the day. Ash absorbs this odor naturally, leaving behind a neutral scent that blends with the faint fragrances from herbs used elsewhere in hygiene routines. To these women, clean does not mean aromatic. It means the absence of anything that signals an imbalance. The simplicity of the process hides its precision. Using too much ash leaves residue. Using too little fails to absorb enough oil. Brushing too aggressively irritates the scalp. Brushing too lightly leaves particles behind. The balance must be found through experience. Women pass down this knowledge without words, using demonstration instead of instruction. No tools are required, only fingers, ash patience, and the desert wind to carry away what has been removed. Yet the outcome is remarkably effective. The hair remains thick, resilient, and nourished. It avoids the fragility seen in hair, repeatedly soaked and dried. It adapts to its environment rather than resisting it. To an outsider, the absence of water might appear unclean. But the desert teaches a different logic. Water is not the sole measure of hygiene. Cleanliness arises from control, from adapting to the body's natural rhythms, and from understanding the dangers water brings when used carelessly. In a place where every decision affects survival, this method is not a compromise. It is a triumph of resourcefulness. Ash and clay reflect the same principle found across all Sahara hygiene practices. The body must cooperate with the land, not fight it. The desert shapes behavior, and behavior becomes tradition. Hair cleansed with ash carries no artificial gloss, but its strength speaks for itself. The dryness that defines the Sahara becomes the very condition that makes this technique work. Their method of cleansing hair with ash shows how survival reshapes even the most ordinary routines into efficient adaptations. From that adaptation arises another form of protection, one built not on minerals or fire, but on the layers worn over the skin. Hidden in those layers is a logic so practical that it quietly dictates how every journey through the desert begins. Clothing in the Sahara is not worn to express style, identity, or status. It is worn to survive. The desert strips away the meaning of garments until only function remains. Fabric becomes a barrier, a buffer, a filter that decides how much of the land reaches the body and how much the body can endure. Women here understand that clothing is not decoration. It is the final defense against a world that consumes unprotected skin without hesitation. The first requirement is thickness. Thin cloth may seem light and comfortable, but it offers no protection against the sand that travels, with the wind slipping into every opening, scratching the skin and settling into the folds of the body. Thick fabric forms a shield. It stops sand before it touches the skin, slowing its movement and blunting its force. The heat trapped between the body and the cloth is not a flaw, but a necessity, because sudden exposure to extreme heat is far more dangerous than the steady warmth created beneath layered clothing. Women choose materials that resist tearing cloth, that maintains its structure even after long exposure to the sun and wind. These garments are heavy, but heaviness is often the only thing that stands between safety and injury. It is almost darkly humorous how elsewhere people value lightweight materials, while here, the weight itself is the protection. The desert reshapes the idea of comfort. into something far more pragmatic. Color matters as well. Outer layers are often dark, meant to absorb heat during the cooler hours of the morning. The absorbed warmth stabilizes the body, preventing the sudden chill that can occur in the early hours before the sun reaches its full intensity. Once the body reaches equilibrium, the clothing regulates temperature by holding that heat close. It resembles managing a delicate system, allowing external forces to shape the inner conditions slowly, instead of shocking them with abrupt changes. I find myself quietly impressed by how deliberately these women choose colors, not for aesthetics, but for survival. Layers serve as additional filtering tools. Sand rarely penetrates multiple layers. The outermost cloth takes the impact while the inner layers remain clean, allowing the body to avoid direct contact with dust and grit. Sweat absorbed by the inner layers evaporates gradually, cooling the body with a soft, controlled rhythm. The layers act together like a living filter, catching dust, heat, and wind before they can disrupt the body's fragile balance. Women wrap themselves in scarves, veils, and robes that move differently from the clothing worn in other regions. The garments billow slightly as they walk, allowing air to circulate between layers. This movement cools the skin without exposing it. The design is not an accident. It results from generations observing the desert's behavior and shaping clothing to cooperate with it. Tight garments would suffocate the skin. Loose garments allow breath. Clothing also plays a crucial role in hygiene. With little access to water, women rely on layers to keep dirt away from their skin. The outer garments collect dust and sweat throughout the day, while the inner layers remain relatively untouched. At night, the outer layers are shaken out or brushed, removing much of the accumulated sand. This routine keeps the skin cleaner than bathing alone could achieve in such an environment. Children learn to dress in layers before they fully understand why. They watch their mothers wrap them tightly before stepping outside, covering their heads, necks, arms, and legs. The children tug at the cloth, testing its weight, then accept it once they feel the sting of sand left uncovered. The lesson becomes physical long before it becomes intellectual. Women rotate fabrics based on the weather. On days with strong winds, they choose thicker weaves. On calmer days, lighter cloth suffices, though still layered. Every choice reflects a negotiation with the desert. Nothing is left to chance. Even the seams matter. Loose stitching lets sand enter. Tight stitching keeps it out. The smallest details become survival tools. At night, clothing continues to protect. Temperatures drop quickly, and the desert becomes cold with alarming speed. Layers retain warmth, preventing the body from losing heat too rapidly. Removing garments too soon after sunset can lead to chills or sickness. Women know this instinctively and adjust their layers with careful timing. Clothing also separates the body from the insects and small creatures that emerge after dark. The fabric forms a barrier that keeps them from reaching the skin. In a place where a simple bite can lead to infection, this barrier is essential. The layers are not just shields against sand and heat, they are shields against the unseen. To outsiders, the many layers might appear excessive, even uncomfortable, but the desert exposes how misguided that assumption is. The layers allow the wearer to walk through harsh conditions with surprising ease. They diffuse heat block, wind filter dust, and regulate temperature. What appears restrictive is in fact liberating because it frees the body from constant environmental assault. In this landscape, clothing becomes the closest companion to survival. It does not merely cover the body, it manages the conditions around it. It absorbs, shields, filters, and stabilizes. The desert respects nothing soft, nothing exposed, nothing unguarded. These women wrap themselves not in fashion but in logic. Their layered clothing reveals how protection becomes a system rather than a single garment. From that system emerges another method of cleanliness, shaped not by fabric, but by how fabric itself is refreshed. Inside that method lies a technique so unassuming that many do not realize it replaces water entirely. Laundry in the Sahara follows a logic that appears unfamiliar to those who tie cleanliness to the idea of soap water and lather. Here, garments are cleaned not by soaking but by sanding, by pressing grains of the desert itself into the cloth and letting friction do what water cannot be spared to do. Women rely on this method, not because it is convenient, but because the desert forces them to rethink what washing even means. Cleanliness becomes something created through abrasion, patience, and a quiet acceptance that the land provides the only tools available. The process begins with the cloth laid flat across the ground or draped over a rock. Then comes the sand, fine, dry, and sifted effortlessly through the fingers. Women pour handfuls of it over the surface, letting it settle before working it into the fibers with firm, steady strokes. The sand lifts oil, sweat, and grime as it moves, binding to the dirt embedded in the threads. Every movement produces a soft scraping sound, a reminder that cleanliness here is built from the same material that threatens to overwhelm everything else. The fabric grows lighter as sand draws impurities toward the surface. After enough friction, the garment is lifted and shaken with sharp, practiced motions. Dust rises into the air, like a muted cloud, carrying away the dirt that water would normally rinse out. What remains is cloth that feels less heavy, less damp, less burdened by the residue of daily life. To those who live here, this is clean, not by the standards of gleaming white fabrics, but by the standards of survival. Water enters the process only reluctantly. A small amount might be used to spot clean a stain or soften a particularly stiff patch of cloth. But even then, the water is applied with the tip of a finger or the edge of a cloth, never poured freely. Water is currency in the Sahara, and laundry cannot afford extravagance. It is almost darkly amusing how elsewhere gallons of water swirl through machines to clean a single shirt, while here a handful of sand performs the same task with far more precision. The women's movements are deliberate. They understand how pressure affects fabric, how sand interacts with different weaves, and when a garment has had enough abrasion, it resembles maintaining a fragile artifact by removing only the dirt that threatens its integrity, not stripping away everything at once. I find myself quietly admiring the balance they keep, cleaning without damage, preserving without waste. Cloth cleaned this way develops a particular texture. It becomes firm yet flexible, carrying the faint roughness of the sand used to clean it. The texture is not unpleasant. It is a reminder that the garment now has fewer impurities clinging to it, fewer oils weighing it down. The desert itself leaves a signature on every cleaned piece of clothing, woven into its surface, as subtly as a breath. Women test the cleanliness of garments by touch rather than by sight. A cloth that feels heavy still carries dirt. One that feels dry and light has been properly cleaned. They judge by the way the fabric moves, the sound it makes when folded, and the feel against the skin. Cleanliness is sensory, not visual. A garment may still appear dusty, but if it no longer holds the weight of sweat and grime, it is considered ready for wear. Children often join in learning to press sand into cloth with their small hands. They laugh at the dust clouds that rise when the garments are shaken. Slowly, repetition builds understanding. Cleanliness becomes a ritual they internalize without needing elaborate explanations. The desert teaches them the logic of scarcity long before they grasp its severity. Cloth is also cleaned by beating it lightly against stones. This dislodges sand trapped from earlier cleaning cycles and removes traces of grit that accumulate over days. These stones are chosen carefully, smooth enough not to tear, heavy enough to absorb impact. The rhythmic beating creates a hollow sound that echoes through camp areas, marking another day of maintenance in a place where maintenance never stops. At night, garments cleaned by sand retain warmth better than freshly washed fabrics, which lose heat through evaporation. This matters in a landscape where temperatures drop suddenly. Wet cloth cools the body dangerously fast. Sand-cleaned cloth, by contrast, stays dry and stable. The desert turns dryness into a form of safety. There are moments when water is unavoidable. Ceremonial garments or heavily stained cloth may require rinsing, but even then, women prepare carefully, choosing a container, measuring water by the handful, softening the fabric slowly. The garment is never submerged fully. Instead, it is dampened, rubbed with care, and dried quickly to prevent evaporation from stealing too much moisture from the air around it. This method of washing reveals something deeper about life here. Hygiene is not about excess. It is about precision, conservation, and adapting every action to an unforgiving environment. Cleanliness is achieved not through abundance, but through discipline and ingenuity. Sand, which seems like an obstacle to outsiders, becomes a tool. The desert takes away, but it also offers, even if what it offers comes in the form of grains that most people try to brush off. Laundry in the Sahara is a partnership with the land. Women do not control the environment. They work with the few constants it provides. Cloth survives because they clean it with what the desert gives them. Their use of sand to wash garments shows how even fabric must adapt to a world where water is a privilege, not a right. From that adaptation emerges another practice shaped by the cycles of the body, a rhythm older than memory. Inside that rhythm lies a method of care so discreet that many overlook how deeply it protects women's health. Personal hygiene in the Sahara follows a rhythm that is both practical and quietly symbolic, shaped by the movement of the moon rather than the ticking of any man-made clock. Women rely on lunar cycles to understand their bodies, not because they romanticize the sky, but because the night offers a consistent measure of time in a landscape where days blur under the same heat and wind. The moon provides a calendar carved from light, its phases guiding when to prepare, when to rest, and when to gather the materials needed to maintain privacy and cleanliness. The waxing and waning of its glow serves as a reminder that the body has its own tides. Women learn from the elders how to read these changes, not in poetic metaphors, but through steady observation. They notice patterns in energy, appetite, and movement. They learn to predict when to carry extra cloth, when to prepare absorbent materials, and when to adjust their routines. In a place where there is no margin for confusion, understanding the body is a survival skill. Reusable cloth is the most common tool for managing the cycle. Pieces are woven tightly and folded multiple times to provide both comfort and absorption. They are not bright or decorative. They are practical, durable, and easy to secure beneath layered garments. Used cloth must be cleaned discreetly, often by rubbing it with sand to remove residue before applying just a small amount of water to finish the task. The process is quiet, methodical, and shaped by the same scarcity that governs all aspects of hygiene here. It is almost ironic how in other places, entire industries revolve around single-use products, while here, resourcefulness becomes the only reliable brand. Clay is another tool, fine, dry, and surprisingly effective. It absorbs moisture quickly and holds it without irritating the skin. Women apply it carefully, letting a thin layer settle before brushing off the excess. It leaves behind a clean, dry surface and reduces discomfort during long hours of travel. Clay is accessible, discreet, and easily replenished. It feels almost like watching a familiar routine upgraded by a natural ingredient. Except the simplicity here exposes how overcomplicated many modern routines have become. I find myself noticing how effortlessly women incorporate this practice into their daily rhythm, treating it not as a burden, but as a continuation of knowledge passed down quietly through generations. Cleanliness during the cycle depends on privacy, and privacy in the Sahara is created through movement rather than enclosed spaces. Women step behind dunes, walk to the shaded side of tents, or use folds of cloth to shield themselves. The environment may be open, but their methods maintain modesty without requiring walls. They work quickly, guided by habit more than thought. Sand plays its familiar role as a cleanser, absorbing moisture and smoothing surfaces before cloth or clay is applied. The body is monitored closely during these days. Women look for signs of imbalance or illness by noting changes in texture, scent, or discomfort. Without doctors nearby, observation becomes a form of protection. They understand the risks of infection in a place where heat and sand mingle. They know when to rest and when to adjust water intake. The moon becomes a silent assistant, reminding them to check on themselves just as reliably as it reminds them of time. Drying the cloth after cleaning is a task shaped by caution. It must be done out of sight, often by placing the pieces beneath layers of fabric where air can circulate slowly. Sunlight is avoided to prevent discoloration and unwanted attention. When drying completes, the cloth is stored in small pouches tied at the waist or hidden beneath bedding. These pouches carry the scent of the desert, dust, wind, and faint traces of clay rather than perfumes. Younger girls learn by watching discreetly and by listening to quiet explanations offered during shared work. Elders teach them not only how to manage the cloth and clay, but how to understand the emotional weight of these days, the need for patience, the importance of rest, and the value of being gentle with the body. It is not a ceremonial lesson, but a practical one, shaped by necessity rather than symbolism. Women calculate their cycle against the moon, noting which phase tends to align with their body's needs. The desert night, with its harsh silence, becomes a backdrop for counting days and observing light. When the moon thins to a sliver, many know exactly what is coming. When it rounds and brightens, they prepare accordingly. The system is simple and quietly reliable. There is dignity in these practices, even if they lack the polish of modern routines. They keep the body clean, prevent infection, and maintain comfort in an unforgiving climate. Nothing is wasted, not cloth, not clay, not effort. Every action serves a purpose, and every step is taken with awareness of how fragile health can be when resources are scarce. Hygiene becomes a private language shared among women, Their routines remain unseen but essential. The desert offers no leniency, yet they shape their methods around its limitations with calm efficiency. In the quiet space between moonlight and sand, they preserve not only cleanliness but resilience. Their quiet routines reflect how privacy becomes a form of protection in a landscape that rarely offers comfort. From those discreet gestures emerges another way of maintaining cleanliness without relying on anything manufactured. In that shift appears a method so resourceful that it challenges the very idea of what hygiene must look like. A person standing in the Sahara long enough will eventually notice that survival often depends on quiet, methodical routines rather than dramatic gestures. And women managing their monthly cycles followed this same pattern with a steadiness, shaped by generations before them. Their approach was neither improvised nor uncertain. It came from years of watching older women copying small movements, refining them, and carrying them into adulthood as if they were ordinary steps in the rhythm of life. In an environment where water was scarce, cloth was precious, and privacy was rare, these routines formed a discrete system that kept them clean without relying on anything manufactured. The desert demanded a relationship with the body that was direct and unembellished. Women paid attention to their cycles with a precision guided not by written records but by the shifting phases of the moon. This connection was practical rather than symbolic. The moon acted as a steady reminder, a quiet calendar in a place where days blurred into heat and wind. When the expected time arrived, they prepared their simple materials, small pieces of reusable cloth, smoothed bits of clay or plant fibers, chosen for their absorbent qualities. Each item served a purpose chosen not for comfort, but for reliability. Cloth was the most common tool, but even then not every cloth was suitable. Women selected pieces woven tightly enough to absorb, yet soft enough not to irritate the skin. These pieces were washed repeatedly, worn down to a gentle texture through long use. When water was available, it was used carefully, first for drinking, then for tending to these clothes. Washing them required discipline, rinsing, wringing, and laying them flat under the sun where heat acted as the desert's version of sterilization. Sunlight became both cleanser and protector. When water was too limited, the clothes were cleaned differently. They were beaten against rocks, dusted with clean sand, or left under direct sun until any lingering moisture evaporated. The desert provided a natural disinfectant through its dryness, and the women had learned how to use it without wasting precious resources. This was not a compromise, but an adaptation. The desert had its rules, and they followed them without complaint. Clay offered another method. Certain types of clay were smooth and absorbent, forming a temporary solution that could be discarded after use. Women shaped these pieces with calm, practiced fingers, testing their density by pressing lightly against the surface. Clay cooled the skin, absorbed moisture efficiently, and posed no risk of irritation when chosen carefully. It was a technique passed down quietly, taught through observation rather than instruction. Privacy was a rare commodity, yet women managed to find it through timing and subtle gestures. Early morning or late evening often became designated moments for personal care. A shawl draped in a particular way signaled a need for space. A short walk behind a dune created enough separation to handle what needed to be handled without drawing attention. Everyone understood these small signs. They were part of the unspoken language of daily survival. Hygiene standards were clear even without industrial products. Women examined their own bodies, carefully alert to changes in texture, color, or pain. They treated irritation with simple remedies: herbal pastes, small amounts of oil, or cooled ash to calm inflammation. These methods were not makeshift experiments. They were solutions refined by centuries of trial and error. Knowledge survived because it worked, and nothing unnecessary was added. Pain or discomfort was addressed quickly, because ignoring them could lead to infections that were far more dangerous in the desert. Women developed an intuitive sense of what was normal and what required attention. This attentiveness became a form of protection, an internal safeguard when the environment offered none. From a distance, these methods might appear minimal. Up close, they revealed a sophisticated understanding of the body and its needs. Modern supplies might offer convenience, but desert techniques offered durability, repeatability, and independence from fragile resources. They were built from understanding rather than abundance. Over time, these routines shaped not only personal hygiene but also cultural habits. Mothers taught daughters without ceremony, passing along cloth folding techniques, clay selection tips, and signs to watch for. Each gesture became part of a lineage of survival. The process was neither shameful nor hidden. It was simply private, handled with dignity and consistency. Observing it from afar means seeing how life adapts without hesitation when necessity leads the way. The desert did not allow excess. Every tool was functional, every movement efficient, every choice deliberate. Cleanliness, during a monthly cycle, became a quiet demonstration of resourcefulness. A reminder that hygiene does not depend on products, but on knowledge and discipline. It was a different definition of cleanliness, leaner, quieter, and stronger. Their practices show how the desert favors precision over abundance when care becomes essential. From that precision emerges another layer of adaptation that reshapes how the body is protected in harsh conditions. Hidden in that next layer lies a method so simple and resilient that it changes the meaning of self-care in the Sahara. In the Sahara, a person quickly learns that skin exposed to wind and sun cannot rely on moisture alone, and women responded to this reality with quiet precision by turning to plant oils that had served their families for generations. Their methods were steady and deliberate, built from long observation of how heat stripped the body of its softness. What they applied to their skin was not luxury, but protection shaped by the demands of a landscape that tolerated no neglect. Argan oil and olive oil were the most valued, though each held a different texture and tone when spread across the skin. Argan oil, drawn slowly from nuts, crushed by practiced hands, carried a thickness that clung to the surface, sealing in moisture with a steadiness suited for harsh days. Olive oil, lighter and smoother, offered a softer layer that still shielded the body from dust and dryness. Women chose between them, depending on the weather, the task ahead, or the condition of their skin that day. Applying the oil was not rushed. The process began with examining the skin closely, looking for areas roughened by wind or marked by faint cracks. These were the places that needed the first layer rubbed gently until the shine dulled into a satin-like finish. The oils worked by forming a barrier, one that kept sand from scraping the pores and sunlight from burning the surface. In a place where shade was temporary and water was rationed, this barrier served as a quiet form of armor. Hands and feet were treated first, since they endured the most friction from walking and working. The oil softened calluses and reduced the sting left behind by grains of sand caught in the creases of the skin. Arms and legs followed each stroke long, and even the motion steady rather than decorative. Nothing was wasted. Every drop had value. Women learned how much to use by feel alone, guided by memory, not measurement. Some women mixed the oils with crushed herbs to enhance the protective effect. Leaves with mild antibacterial qualities added a faint scent and helped prevent irritation. The mixture, stored in small clay pots, thickened slightly over time, forming a paste-like texture that clung even more firmly to the skin. This combination served well during the hottest days when the body was most vulnerable to the burn of the sun and the abrasion of dust carried by shifting winds. For the face, the application was lighter. Too much oil could trap heat, so women adjusted the amount to create a thin sheen rather than a glossy layer. They worked carefully around the eyes, where dryness came quickly, and along the nose, where wind often caused peeling. The goal was not beauty but preservation. Skin left unprotected could crack, bleed, and invite infection, an avoidable danger if the oils were used consistently. At night, the oils played a different role. After the heat faded, the desert air turned unexpectedly cool and dry. A thin layer applied before sleeping kept the skin from tightening or itching. Rest felt deeper when the body was protected from the night's invisible pull of moisture. Women understood these shifts and adapted their routines without fuss, adjusting the thickness or frequency according to the season and the demands of daily life. Storage required care. The oils were kept away from direct sunlight to prevent spoilage. Clay containers sealed with woven fibers maintained a cooler temperature that extended their usefulness. Women checked these containers regularly, shaking them gently to keep the texture consistent. The oils were too valuable to risk spoilage, and diligence ensured nothing was wasted. What might appear simple from a distance was in truth a system refined over centuries. The oils were not treated as cosmetic items, but as essential tools for survival. They protected the body when water was scarce, soothed irritation when sandstorms passed through camp, and maintained the skin's resilience during long journeys. Even children grew up familiar with the sight of mothers smoothing oil across their arms, learning the importance of these routines through quiet repetition. The desert demanded endurance, and endurance required soft, unbroken skin. Cracked or inflamed areas slowed movement and invited pain. Women knew this and approached skincare with the same seriousness they applied to food storage or clothing repair. Nothing about the process was indulgent. It was maintenance, and maintenance was a form of strength. Some travelers misinterpreted the sheen on the skin as decorative. They assumed it reflected vanity rather than practicality, but anyone who stayed long enough realized it served a purpose as functional as a shield. The oils kept the heat from sinking too deeply into the body, kept the sand from scraping, raw the hands that worked each day, and kept the face from burning under a sun that offered no mercy. Over time, the practice became a symbol not of beauty but of endurance. The desert left no room for unnecessary steps. What remained had survived because it worked. Plant oils stayed in use because they offered reliable protection, long-lasting moisture, and a barrier against the harshness that defined daily life. Observing this routine reveals how knowledge built from scarcity can shape habits more effectively than abundance ever could. Their use of plant oils shows how survival becomes a slow, precise ritual when nothing can be taken for granted. From that ritual emerges another form of care, one that involves no cloth or vessel, but relies instead on objects found directly in the desert. Inside that form lies a method so stark in its simplicity that it shifts the meaning of cleanliness itself. In the Sahara, cleanliness relied less on what could be purchased and more on what the land was willing to offer, and women learned early that smooth stones and soft leaves were often the only tools available when privacy and necessity met. These materials, gathered with quiet care, formed a method of hygiene that required no industry, no trade, and no promises other than what nature itself provided. The simplicity was not a matter of choice, but of adaptation shaped by a place where water rarely appeared and where every action needed to be efficient. Stones were selected first. They had to be round enough to avoid scratching the skin, smooth enough to glide without discomfort, and small enough to hold securely. Women knew which areas of the desert produced stones with the right texture, and they collected them during slower hours of the day. The stones were then washed whenever water was available, or wiped thoroughly with sand to remove grit. Each stone was examined carefully, not for beauty but for usefulness, a quiet demonstration of how purpose outweighed appearance. Leaves served a different role. While not plentiful, certain shrubs growing near oases or shaded areas produced leaves with a pliable surface. These leaves were chosen for their softness and durability qualities that mattered during delicate routines. They were folded once or twice to create a cushioned layer, then used quickly before drying out in the heat. Their value lay in their temporary nature, something meant to be used and returned to the earth with no waste left behind. The process of cleaning relied on a sequence of steps repeated until they became instinctive. First came the use of stones or leaves to wipe away residue. The motion was gentle, but thorough, carried out with attention to avoid irritation. A rough stone or brittle leaf could cause small cuts, and women remained mindful of how fragile the skin could be in a place where healing took time. The desert slowed recovery, and every precaution mattered. After wiping, the next step depended entirely on resources. If water was available, even a small amount, it was used sparingly to rinse the area. A single handful could make a difference, and women learned how to direct the water with care so that nothing was wasted. But because water could not be counted on, the more common method involved using sand. Sand, when sifted between the fingers to remove sharp fragments, acted as a natural abrasive that cleaned without soaking the skin. It absorbed moisture, removed lingering particles, and left the surface dry. This routine, though simple, was effective. Cleanliness in the Sahara did not depend on soaps or chemical products, but on understanding how natural materials behaved. Stones cooled quickly in the shade, making them soothing on hot days. Leaves held faint moisture that eased the wiping process. Sand, warmed by the sun, lifted residue from the skin and prevented irritation that might appear if sweat dried unevenly. Each material played a role shaped by centuries of observation. Women stored their chosen stones in small cloth pouches or pockets sewn into their garments. The stones were kept separate from other items to ensure they remained smooth and clean. Leaves, being temporary, were gathered as needed. If a journey required preparation, women planned collecting leaves near water sources and carrying them wrapped in fabric to keep them from drying too quickly. Every step involved foresight, a quiet acknowledgement that the desert rarely allowed improvisation. Hygiene in this context was not a private luxury, but a necessary discipline. Clean skin meant fewer infections. Efficient routines meant less water wasted. Respecting these routines preserved health in a landscape where illness could escalate quickly. Women understood this deeply. Though they rarely spoke of it, their actions, steady and practiced, formed a language of care that passed between generations without the need for formal instruction. Even the social perspective on cleanliness differed from what one might expect. Using stones and leaves was not seen as primitive or undesirable. It was simply how things were done, shaped by a world where industry had little presence and where survival demanded frugality. To the women of the Sahara, the method was not inferior, it was intelligent. It relied on materials always within reach, required no storage beyond a small pouch, and adapted easily to changing conditions. Travelers unfamiliar with the desert sometimes viewed the practice with confusion, not realizing how effective it could be. They looked for soaps, for cloth, for items common in urban environments. But over time, even they recognized the practicality of using stones and leaves when water ran low. The desert rearranged priorities, and the body adapted to rhythms that made sense only after prolonged exposure to heat, scarcity, and wind. The effectiveness of this method revealed something larger. Hygiene in the Sahara was defined not by abundance, but by resourcefulness. It showed how carefully women studied the land, learning to make use of elements that others might overlook. Smooth stones became tools, soft leaves became temporary cloth, sand became a cleanser. Nothing was wasted, and nothing was viewed as too simple to be useful. This quiet system demonstrates how cleanliness forms itself from what the environment allows rather than what society expects. From this understanding rises another layer of care, one that roots itself in tradition rather than invention. Through that tradition emerges a practice so enduring that it reshapes how survival is taught across generations. Across Sahara communities, the understanding of hygiene often began long before a girl realized she was learning anything at all, shaped not by instruction, but by watching the women who moved steadily through each day. Mothers and grandmothers rarely spoke about technique, yet every gesture held meaning. Children absorbed these motions quietly, noticing how hands brushed dust from fabric, how oil smoothed dry skin, and how sand replaced water when none could be spared. What they learned came not from explanation but from presence. Grandmothers carried the deepest memory of these routines. Their movements were slower, yet their precision showed years of adaptation to a landscape where mistakes cost comfort, sometimes health. They knew the right time to tend to the skin, the right moment to shake out garments before dusk, and the right way to inspect small irritations before they grew into real problems. Children watched these details unfold in real time, rarely aware that the desert itself was their silent instructor. Mothers continued the chain of learning through participation. Tasks were handed to children not as lessons, but as responsibilities appropriate to their age. A child might be given a cloth to shake out a small pouch of stones to clean with sand, or a leaf to fold and store before it dried. These small actions built a foundation of instinct that grew stronger with repetition. Hygiene did not stand apart from daily life. It lived inside every preparation, every journey, every pause between tasks. Young girls often learned more from observation than from any spoken direction. They noticed how older women tested the texture of leaves before using them, how they pressed sand between their fingers to sift out sharp grains, and how they applied oil only where the skin needed reinforcement. These decisions, subtle and quiet, shaped a deep understanding of resourcefulness. The landscape offered little, so each generation learned to make the most of whatever was available. The routines themselves were born from necessity. Over time, women refined the techniques that protected the body from dryness, heat, and infection. Methods that failed disappeared, while those that worked remained carried forward until they felt inseparable from culture. Outsiders sometimes misunderstood this simplicity as a lack of sophistication. But anyone who lived in the desert long enough recognized it as the result of hundreds of years of careful adaptation. Occasionally, correction came in gentle gestures rather than in words. A grandmother might adjust a child's wrist to soften the pressure of wiping, or hand her a smoother stone without explanation. These small interventions taught precision without interrupting the natural flow of the task. Over months and years, girls grew into a familiarity with these motions that felt instinctive rather than learned. These inherited routines connected generations in a quiet, enduring way. A girl performing them echoed movements her ancestors had once relied upon. In each action lived memory of people whose names were forgotten, but whose techniques survived through practice. This continuity offered stability in a place where the environment shifted constantly. Wind patterns changed, Temperatures rose and fell, and water appeared and disappeared. Yet the routines remained steady. Some families worked together during the same hour each day, forming a shared rhythm. While older women tended to the skin, younger ones cleaned stones or checked garments for areas worn thin by sand. These moments offered companionship without conversation. The repetition fostered a sense of unity, as if hygiene were a collective inheritance rather than an individual responsibility. Tradition also influenced how new ideas were received. If a technique did not align with what past generations had proven effective, it was quickly dismissed. Women trusted what they had tested across countless summers, storms, and periods of scarcity. Efficiency mattered more than novelty. What worked was kept, what failed was forgotten, and what endured became part of the cultural fabric. Hygiene served not only to protect the body, but also to reinforce discipline. Girls learned early that neglecting small routines could lead to discomfort or illness, conditions the desert magnified without mercy. The routines therefore taught responsibility through action. Cleanliness was not about appearance. It was about ensuring the body remained capable of meeting daily demands. These tasks often carried emotional weight: the scent of oils, the warmth of sand, the soft rustle of cloth against skin. Each element could evoke memories of the women who had once performed the same motions. Hygiene became an intimate link to the past, preserving not just methods, but the presence of those who had passed them down. Over time, these practices became so ingrained that they no longer felt like choices. They were simply part of what it meant to live in the Sahara. Girls grew into women who repeated the same gestures without questioning their origins, trusting the wisdom carried through generations. In these routines, survival and culture merged until they became indistinguishable. This quiet continuity shows how the desert's demands are met through knowledge, carried gently from one generation to the next. From that continuity rises another practice, shaped not by scarcity alone, but by the materials that women reshape and repurpose through touch. Out of those materials emerges a method so enduring that it deepens the understanding of how people adapt their bodies to the land they inhabit. Hygiene in the Sahara reveals itself not as a set of instructions, but as an art formed quietly over centuries, shaped by the land's demands rather than personal ideals. Women approached cleanliness with a patience that came from long familiarity with scarcity, knowing that every gesture had to serve a purpose. Nothing was done impulsively, and nothing was added without testing. Their routines grew from observing how the desert behaved, how heat settled on skin, how wind carried dust into folds of cloth, how dryness thickened the air until the body felt stretched. Hygiene became a response to these conditions, a soft choreography rooted in necessity. Selecting materials became the first expression of this art. Women chose stones only if they were rounded and smooth by time, leaves only if they could bend without breaking sand, only if it had been sifted free of sharp fragments. Even plant oils were evaluated by texture and thickness, chosen according to weather or season, not preference. Each material served a specific function, and misjudgment could mean irritation or infection. Nothing about the process was random. Every choice reflected years of careful observation. Using these materials demanded another layer of attentiveness. Sand could not be applied roughly. It required a slow, steady motion to lift residue from the skin without causing scratches. Leaves needed to be folded properly to create an even surface. Stones had to be cooled in the shade so the skin did not react to sudden heat. Even oil requires technique. Its application is shaped by the needs of different areas of the body. Women learned which sections of skin dried first, which became irritated in storms, and which needed more shielding under harsh sun. Hygiene became a language of movement, quiet yet precise. This art extended to timing. Certain tasks were always done at dawn or twilight, when the sun's intensity eased and the skin responded more gently. Cleaning fabrics, shaking garments, or inspecting the body for irritation took place during these windows of softer light. Daylight was reserved for tasks requiring strength, not delicacy. By aligning hygiene with the rhythm of the desert, women reduced strain on both body and resources. The environment dictated the pace, and they followed it with an ease shaped by generations. Space mattered too. Hygiene often occurred in areas shielded by fabric or stone, where wind carried less dust, and where a woman could work without interruption. These small pockets of privacy became essential for tasks requiring precision. Children learned from these spaces not by entering them, but by noticing how consistently women returned to them. The act of choosing a place as much as choosing a material formed part of the artistry. Some actions appeared almost ceremonial, though their purpose was entirely practical. A woman might warm oil between her palms before touching her skin, or test the edge of a leaf before using it. These gestures were repeated thousands of times across a lifetime, each one shaped by experience rather than instruction. The routines did not change quickly. They evolved slowly only when the land itself demanded adaptation. This deliberate pace gave the practices a sense of endurance rarely seen in more modern routines shaped by convenience. To outsiders, such methods might seem minimal or outdated, lacking the complexity of manufactured products. But in the Sahara, effectiveness mattered more than abundance. A method persisted only if it worked under pressure, under heat, dryness, storms, and scarcity. That reliability turned simple actions into something resembling craftsmanship. Women became both practitioners and preservers of knowledge, refined far beyond what written instruction could capture. Over time, this artistry became woven into identity. Cleanliness was not simply a physical state, but a reflection of discipline, adaptability, and respect for the environment. Girls learned that hygiene was an ongoing conversation with the land, one that required listening more than innovation. Women learned to read small signs of change, shifts in wind, sudden dryness, traces of irritation, and adjusted their routines in response. These adjustments demonstrated mastery, not improvisation. Even silence became part of the practice. Women rarely explained why they did things a certain way because the explanations lived inside the gestures themselves. The routines looked simple only because they had been refined until nothing unnecessary remained. Simplicity was not an absence of complexity. It was the result of removing every step that did not serve survival. This understanding shaped the emotional dimension of hygiene. Caring for the body became a way of honoring the knowledge passed down from ancestors who had endured the same environment. Each action carried a sense of responsibility to maintain what had been given. No matter how harsh the desert became, the routines endured protected by memory and repetition. This quiet artistry continues to reveal how deeply connected the women of the Sahara are to the land they inhabit. Their hygiene practices are more than routines. They are the product of thousands of years of adjustment, resilience, and observation. What they do is not born from abundance, but from mastery over scarcity, a mastery built one gesture at a time. This enduring system shows how survival becomes a craft shaped through countless generations of precision. From that craft rises another understanding, one rooted not in avoidance but in acceptance of the desert's constant presence. In that acceptance emerges a perspective so revealing that it reshapes what cleanliness means in a place where resources remain limited. Understanding scent in the Sahara required a different kind of awareness, one shaped by a climate where heat intensified every odor and scarcity made artificial fragrances irrelevant. Women learned early that the body carried signals, some natural, some warnings, and that maintaining balance mattered more than creating an imposed sense of cleanliness. In this environment, scent was not something to hide, but something to read, a subtle indicator of health, hydration, and exposure to the elements. The desert revealed truths quickly. Sweat evaporated faster than it formed, leaving behind faint traces of salt and earth rather than the heavy odors found in more humid climates. Women recognized this normal scent as part of daily life, neither offensive nor concerning. What mattered was when the scent shifted, when dryness deepened too sharply, when irritation formed, when heat accumulated in ways the body could not regulate. Such changes signaled something beyond simple exertion. They signaled an imbalance. Because of this, masking the body with strong fragrances held no purpose. Artificial scents would fade within minutes under the sun and could even trap heat against the skin. Instead, women used natural methods to maintain a neutral presence: sand to absorb moisture, plant oils to protect the surface, and breathable layers of cloth to manage airflow. These choices did not aim to eliminate scent. They aimed to preserve what was healthy and prevent what could become harmful. Hygiene therefore became a system of listening rather than controlling. Women understood the faint sweetness that came from plant oils warming on the skin, the dry mineral scent left after sand cleaning, and the clean air that clung to garments shaken free of dust. These scents were not perfumes, but confirmations that the body remained in harmony with its surroundings. Anything sharper, heavier, or unusual required attention. Sweat itself behaved differently in the Sahara. The dry air prevented moisture from lingering long enough to create strong odors. Instead, The skin released heat through evaporation, leaving an almost imperceptible trace. Because of this, the body's natural scent was not considered unpleasant. It was considered information. Women used this information to adjust their routines, adding more oil, cleaning certain areas with stones or leaves, or increasing rest during the hottest hours. Cleanliness emerged not from covering the body, but from tending to its needs. Clothing also shaped how scent moved. The layered garments commonly worn in the desert created pockets of shade that reduced overheating. Breathable fabrics absorbed sweat quickly and released it just as fast, preventing build-up. Women shook their garments, often letting dust fall away and allowing air to pass through the fibers. This constant rhythm of maintenance kept both body and fabric from trapping unwanted odors. Even community spaces had their own scent norms. No one expected a body to smell like flowers or oils. Instead, people recognized variations in scent as natural outcomes of movement, work, and weather. A person who smelled strongly of dryness or dust was simply someone returning from travel or labor. A person whose scent carried signs of illness or dehydration was met with concern rather than judgment. The community understood that scent was part of survival. This perspective shaped how children were raised. Girls learned early that managing scent meant managing health. They listened to the elder woman describe what dryness felt like on the skin, how heat changed the body's output, and why certain routines mattered more after storms or long journeys. These lessons did not carry shame. They carried practicality. Women taught that the goal was not to erase scent, but to maintain balance between the body and the land. Plant-based fragrances played a small but meaningful role. Women sometimes used dried herbs not to conceal odor but to soften it, creating a mild, barely noticeable presence. A sprig worn beneath a head covering or tied inside a garment added a touch of freshness that blended with natural scent rather than overwhelming it. These gentle additions reflected the belief that cleanliness harmonized with nature. It did not compete with it. Some travelers misunderstood this approach, expecting stronger scents or manufactured soaps. But those products failed quickly under desert conditions, leaving behind residues that irritated the skin or trapped heat. Over time, even outsiders recognized that the desert required different logic, one that valued neutrality over embellishment, stability over masking. In the Sahara, the cleanest person was not the most perfumed, but the most balanced. This understanding created a quiet confidence. Women walked with the knowledge that their bodies carried nothing unnecessary, that their routines preserved health without pretense. Cleanliness became less about presentation and more about resilience. It reflected how the body adapted to scarcity, heat, and movement, showing that survival depended as much on sensitivity as on strength. In this context, scent became a thread connecting body, land, and culture. It grounded people in their environment and guided their actions. No one questioned its importance because everyone understood its purpose. Cleanliness was not a performance. It was a form of alignment, a way of living inside the desert rather than against it. This balanced relationship with scent reveals how survival relies on listening to the body rather than forcing it into artificial standards. From that listening grows another insight, one rooted in traditions that stretch far beyond modern expectations. Among those traditions emerges a legacy so enduring that it shifts how future generations will come to understand natural hygiene. Across the modern world, where routines are shaped by products, packaging, and endless explanations printed on small labels, the hygiene practices of the Sahara carry a quiet contrast that feels both distant and unexpectedly relevant. What once emerged from scarcity now appears to many as a guide towards sustainability. The routines developed by generations of women who lived with limited water, intense heat, and constant exposure to dust are being reconsidered not as remnants of the past, but as methods capable of informing the future. Their simplicity, born of necessity, reveals an understanding of the body and environment that modern life often overlooks. Researchers examining sustainable hygiene now turn toward these traditions with renewed interest. They study how sand can function as a cleanser when water must be preserved, how plant oils create long-lasting protection without synthetic additives, and how natural materials, like leaves and stones, can serve purposes once reserved for manufactured items. These methods, refined through centuries, offer insights into practices that reduce waste, conserve resources, and avoid chemical dependence. What was once used because nothing else existed now stands out as a model of efficiency. Natural cosmetics industries increasingly draw inspiration from the Sahara as well. products labeled as raw, cold-pressed, or earth-derived echo the ways women used argan oil, clay, and plant resins not for beauty, but for preservation. These modern imitations often come in glass bottles decorated with elegant designs, yet the core idea remains the same. The land provides what the body needs when its materials are understood and treated with care. The contrast between ancient necessity and modern marketing reveals how the desert's quiet knowledge has moved far beyond its borders. Some companies highlight their use of earthy tones, unrefined textures, or traditional ingredients, hoping to capture a sense of authenticity. But the women of the Sahara never spoke of authenticity. For them, these materials were not choices, they were lifelines. Their routines had no interest in aesthetics. They focused solely on maintaining resilience. Yet this resilience now becomes a source of commercial fascination. Clay masks, oil treatments, and exfoliating sands are all framed as rediscoveries, though they are simply echoes of what desert women practiced daily without ceremony. What modern consumers often miss is the underlying logic. These routines were never about indulgence. They were about alignment with the environment. Women understood that the desert offered little, so they engaged with it carefully. They learned its rhythms, its limits, its quiet offerings. They discovered how certain clays cooled the skin, how specific oils shielded it, and how fabrics layered correctly could manage heat and dust. They shaped their hygiene, not around preference, but around survival. This alignment is perhaps the most meaningful lesson the modern world can draw from these traditions. In many places, hygiene has become a cycle of consumption products, used briefly, discarded, quickly replaced, endlessly. The Sahara offers an alternative perspective. It shows that cleanliness does not require abundance. It requires understanding. The body can thrive when its needs are met with precision rather than excess. The environment responds gently when it is asked for little rather than much. The idea of natural hygiene now circulates widely, though it rarely captures the depth of what it meant in the desert. For women, natural hygiene was not a movement or trend, it was a relationship. It grounded them in a land that softened nothing, a land whose harshness demanded awareness. Every gesture was a form of communication, sand pressed into cloth oil, smoothed into skin stones selected for their texture. These actions shaped not just cleanliness, but identity. They taught discipline, resilience, and sensitivity to subtle changes in the environment. In the modern world, people speak of reconnecting with nature, yet the Sahara's traditions show a connection that never required articulation. Women simply lived it. Their routines offered no separation between self and land. Cleanliness was not something applied to the body from the outside, but something maintained through interaction with surroundings. It was a steady practice, built from respect rather than preference. As global water scarcity becomes a more pressing concern, the dry cleansing methods of the Sahara gain particular relevance. Using sand to clean fabrics or remove residue from skin demonstrates how hygiene can function even when water is rationed. Plant oils show how moisture can be preserved in hostile climates. Clay reveals how the skin can cool without relying on chemicals. These practices suggest adaptations that may become increasingly valuable far beyond desert regions. There is also a cultural dimension to this legacy, one that cannot be packaged or sold. The women of the Sahara taught their routines through presence, not instruction. They passed knowledge quietly from one generation to the next, shaping continuity without formal systems. This form of teaching, rooted in observation rather than explanation, reflects a respect for experience that modern society often moves too quickly to appreciate. It suggests that wisdom develops slowly through repetition, through attention, through care. As these traditions circulate globally, something subtle shifts. People begin to see that the simplest methods often hold the strongest logic. Those survival strategies refined across centuries are not primitive, but deeply intelligent. That scarcity can shape clarity more effectively than abundance. And that natural hygiene is not a return to the past, but an acknowledgement of how much can be done with little when knowledge replaces excess. Standing at the edge of the modern world, these practices carry a quiet weight. They remind us that the body has always adapted, and that adaptation often comes from listening rather than controlling. The desert taught women how to listen to their skin, to the wind, to the shifting heat. Their routines now resonate with people far removed from sand and sun, showing that resilience is not a matter of strength alone, but of sensitivity. Their legacy persists, not because it has been reinvented, but because it never needed reinvention. It endures because it worked. It endures because it respects the balance between body and land. It endures because it treated hygiene not as a pursuit of perfection, but as a practice of survival. As the world grows more complex, these traditions offer a form of stillness, a reminder that caring for the body can be gentle, thoughtful, and rooted in understanding rather than consumption. A reminder that the simplest routines can form the strongest foundations. And a reminder that knowledge shaped by hardship often holds truths that remain steady across time. And so as we reach the end of this journey through Sahara hygiene, the desert's quiet lessons linger. They reveal how survival can become art, how scarcity can shape wisdom, and how the body can endure when care is shaped with intention rather than excess. Tonight may you drift into sleep with the quiet understanding that even the harshest landscapes can teach the gentlest lessons.